Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Automation Hour. So we are thrilled to have you here. As always, we'll go through a little bit of logistics before we get into the content today. So first things first, we do have everyone muted. However, we encourage your interaction. So please post your questions either here in the chat, the question widget in GoToMeeting, or you can post them to our Trailblazer community group. We'll take those throughout the session and make sure those get answered. We're also recording the session, and we will post this to our YouTube channel after it is done rendering. So as always, we invite you to connect with us wherever makes the most sense, Trailblazer community, our website, or your preferred social media. So we are going bootcamp this year. We have changed up Automation Hour from being a whole bunch of cool use cases to actually getting into the fundamentals of flow and teaching you how to actually approach and build your automations. Huge, great lineup this year. So here's the first half of the year. We also have the second half of the year coming up. Again, you can register for all of those sessions at automationhour.com/upcoming webinars. So we hope to see you on this in future webinars as you need. And of course, we cannot bring this to you without our amazing sponsors, so we want to give a shout out to them. First, Concrete.io, who has been with us since the beginning of Automation Hour, roughly 6 years ago, as well as our newer sponsors. So Sumo Scheduler, if you haven't checked them out, we definitely encourage you to do so. They will also be doing a demo session upcoming on Automation Hour, so you can learn more about them. And of course, we all love to notify you when we have these great sessions, and so ActiveCampaign helps us to manage that as well. So thank you to all of them. So as always, your co-host, you've got me today, Michelle Hansen. Hey, Rakesh, he's off in India, where it is definitely time for him to be sleeping, or at least having a really good time if he's still up. But we are thrilled to be able to bring this event to you. And so with that, I am going to pass it over to our amazing guest presenters today. We have Walter Spinrad, who is a certified technical architect, as well as Tom Hoffman, who is a Salesforce MVP. So gentlemen, take it away.
Walter, you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
You know, I never tire of talking about myself. I think that's that's a given. So, hello everyone. Glad to be here. Glad to be able to share some of the wisdom I have gained over the years. I am Walter Spinrad. I currently the leader of the Salesforce architecture team at Crow LLP. I've been there since May of 2022. Prior to that, I was 7 years with Salesforce as part of the program architect and technical architect group, leading and helping grow the enablement process there.
Walter,
when I'm not doing anything,
I think the most fascinating part of your bio for me is that you were at a national no-profit, which is,
Yes, yeah, exactly. I was at a national no-profit because I have fat fingers. But yeah, definitely there was almost zero residual every year, if not negative. So it was a good mission. It was a great mission. When I'm not spending time doing things like this or leading my team or working with our customers, I get to spend time with my wife and my dogs because, well, my kids are all grown now. So that's where the traveling comes in. I get to travel and go cook for them because, well, they don't have time to, being young adults, either in med school or college.
So we're going to play a fun game. You can count the number of times that Walter mentions his dogs today. You can win a prize. So, or that we mention his dogs. So it'll be a running punchline. But Tom Hoffman, I'm a practice lead here at Crow as well with Walter. I came into the Salesforce world from being a really, really bad admin at a nonprofit, through many years of work, into the Salesforce world and now reformed. Try and stay really involved with the Salesforce community. I always love doing Automation Hour. I just think this is my third time, being able to do this. So excited to share with you guys today. So we get into the heart of the thing. The way I think about this, that the schedule that Rakesh and Michelle have put together for 2023 is phenomenal. I think this boot camp idea is going to be so powerful and something that continues to build throughout the year. So when they asked for people to do this first session, I was like, oh, so we get to sort of be that opening overture at the beginning of the of the show that sort of previews what's to come. And I think that's really what we're aiming to do today, to establish sort of goals for your automation strategy. What are the work that you need to be doing now so that as you develop these skills throughout the year in the boot camp that you can build upon those. And we'll talk about things that are coming. We're going to talk about process mapping, but there's going to be an entire session on process mapping. And we're going to talk about some different types of flow and flow triggers in design, but you're going to be doing sessions on those flow triggers in design later in the year. So this is meant to sort of give you an end-to-end look at what your automation strategy should look like. A lot of this is based off of our experience and opinion, and we're happy to answer questions or to get into discussion at the end of the session as well. So our topics for today, really we want to focus on building our, what sort of goals should you have around an automation strategy? What do you need to do to prepare, and to have a very, focused automation strategy? And then getting into how do we determine what to automate? And then once you've determined what to do, what are the sort of technical principles that you need to adhere by? With whatever time we have left, we'll continue the witty banter, and I don't know, maybe we'll talk about what it's like to be raising twin dogs, while being a full-time CTA. So to start off, I mean, this question, what's your goal? It's easy to say, we want to automate everything. Let's automate more. Sure. But I think what I mean by the question, and when we say, what is your goal? I think a good example is to look at healthcare. And in healthcare, they have this concept of the triple aim. The triple aim is focused on improving health, providing better care experiences, and then also creating efficiencies and reducing waste, which hopefully drives down costs. And so for them, that's how they organize their thoughts around process improvement. This is that gold standard that basically everyone looks to in healthcare. So I was thinking, what is our triple aim? From the Salesforce perspective, what are the things that we should be focused on as we build out our strategy and sort of our mission statement for automation? And I think the first one and the most important one is experience. Automation for automation's sake that does not result in a better end user customer experience isn't great. And one of the things we would want to do is also achieve better outcomes. Right? If we can automate things, we reduce the chances for errors. We have better available data for decision making, things like that. And then the last real focus that we should have as we go about automation strategy is the obvious one. How do we focus our most constrained resource, our most expensive resource, which is talent? How do we have those people focused in working up to the top of their abilities, as opposed to working on moving a piece of paper from here to here, or moving a piece of data from this field on this screen to this field on that screen, or this field in a different system, right? How do we get our people engaged in high value tasks that are more rewarding as well? So I think to wrap up sort of this opening statement on goals, part of that comes with exactly this. What are you trying to achieve? What is it as an organization or as a team or even just as an admin? Not even just as an admin. What are you trying to achieve? What is your purpose? And then some examples here. We want to reduce time to quote. We want to improve our CSATs. And then you see these are specific goals. And I think that's part of this process at the very beginning is one, understanding a framework for setting goals, and then also then setting those goals. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Walt.
Yeah, I won't call out you're just an admin. I think the admins are the tip of the spear.
I called myself out. It wasn't intentional.
I think we all started an admin at some point.
I would say I started out as a button clicker. What do they call it? Like a 007, like, enough to kill. I knew enough to kill my org.
That's it. All right. So what we want to do is look at when you're starting your path down the track for automation is building that foundation. So what do you need to do first? Very critical. You have to understand what the current process is. Whether you're leading your own company or you are a consultant leading a customer, it's very important to make sure you have a clear understanding of what is happening where. So you need to make sure you schedule working sessions with key members of each persona. And when I say persona, is it a salesperson? Is it a support person? Is it an accountant? Is it a manager? Understanding their process step by step from start to finish. Through this, it'll allow you to identify your candidates for automation, and you'll base that on pain points and efficiencies. There are other metrics to measure and rate and prioritize, but that it all comes down to that. So if you take a look at an example of what I'm talking about, you want to go in, take the sales rep. The sales rep needs to complete a stage of something during the sales cycle, and then the next step they have to do is go in and create a follow-up task. So they open up tasks, add detail, add due dates, and save records. Well, that's a lot of extra clicks. When if done properly, you can automate some of those mundane tasks. So it saves 5 to 10 minutes every day for that salesperson per transaction. Next. All right. So the key to your discoveries, and I call it discoveries, but it's really more process mapping workshops, is understanding what you're trying to capture. So we'll talk about who should take part in these meetings a little later. But the key to the process mapping is look at each process from start to finish. So a salesperson, what does their day look like? What does the life cycle of a sale look like? From acquisition of a lead to closing of the sale to fulfillment and beyond. Where might that process hand off to another resource? So after fulfillment, does support take over? What does their process look like? Here's a great example of a process map. And this is what the end result would look like after you've spent an hour or two with the actors to capture every step, whether it's swivel chair, whether it's manual, who's responsible for what, where does it touch the people, where does it touch the systems. Assuming this deck will be available.
I think probably the main point with process mapping that I like to emphasize is that we're not focused on technology when you're doing this. You're really focused on the work that happens. From the point where leads identified, we want to know what happens with that information and who touches it. What are the stage gates? What's added to it? What allows it to move through those stage gates? And what are the artifacts of each one of those things that it moves through? And once you have all of that in a picture, then you can start worrying about like which systems is that happening and who's responsible each step of the way. And you almost think of a process map as having 3 layers. You have a actual business process and how a function takes place or how a bill becomes a law, as it's said on here. But underneath of that, you have a people diagram. So every step of the way, you know the people that are tied to each one of those steps. And then underneath of that, it's almost like a schematic for a building, right? The wiring and the outlets and the switches and all of that. That's the system. Those are the systems at play, and how those systems interact is the 3rd level. So when you're process mapping, I think it's important to look at each one of those things because you need to put them all together to form a complete picture.
Yeah, thanks. And that's actually a really good point, Tom. As you go through, as Tom said, it is so much less about the current technology and more about the true intent of each step and how to make sure that intent is met. All right, next. So when you look at what stakeholders should be part of the process mapping exercise, these are pretty high level, pretty vague, but what you want to make sure is you have whoever's the product owner of the system or product owners of the system are in there as contributors. You want to have your process SME, so you want a sales SME, you want a service SME, accounting SME, whatever other actors are in play. And you don't want them isolated just for each of their own process. You want them all in the same room, because as you go through one, they might see something that helps them, or they might actually do something during the process that the other person is not aware of. So it really helps you build out that full picture. One side to never forget during this is make sure there's a customer experience advocate in the room to contribute as well, especially if this is a company that does, B2C, and you have Experience Cloud, or they have a website with some type of process for the customer, or they just have a clear vision of what they want the customer to experience. Letting they can draw that same process. Customers follow process too. We should have that mapped and see what can be automated there.
I think we missed something at the beginning, Walter, and that's, when we were talking about the AAA and just reinforcing that automation is really process improvement. It is a flavor of process improvement, but the reason why we're going through all these steps is that in order to set up an automation program and have an automation strategy, it has to be rooted in what it really is, and that is we're transforming the way that people work and the way people interact, and so we're changing processes. And so process transformation is a team sport, whereas maybe building a flow is maybe a solo sport in the moment, which is why it's so foundational to what we're going to be talking about later.
Yeah, great addition, Tom. As you look at it, anybody can build the flow, but why are you building a flow, and how does it fit in, and what efficiencies does it create? So the key, and maybe we just had the slide out of order, is creating that automation vision. And to do that, you have to do the discovery. You take the discovery and the information gathered during that process mapping, and then you start identifying where are the pain points, and where are the places that are candidates for adding efficiency improvements through automation. At the end, you have your vision. You define success of what that vision should look like. Examples of what success definitions would be is, these are answers that need to be provided by the customer or the company, not the people doing the work or the facilitators. And that is, what are you trying to achieve? So I want to reduce my clicks by 20%, or I want to reduce time from quote to cash by 30% by the end of the day. How do you measure or track the progress? Looking at time to move from stage to stage, looking at time to close a task, looking at time to return a call, whatever the metrics and KPIs identified. And in the end, how do you know you're successful? You set a time period on where you want to measure that, before and after. So you should already have your baseline. If not, part of your process mapping should also help define a baseline of how long things take currently. And then, go ahead, Tom.
No, that's a perfect transition into the next topic in terms of baselining. So.
Yep. All right. So once you have your baseline, it allows you then to measure how those things have improved, and that will help you really show the success in a data-driven manner instead of just anecdotal. On to you, Tom.
And that's, again, perfect transition here. Everything that we do, up until this point, you've kind of got a lot of people into the room. You've been gathering a lot of information. You're making plans. We haven't automated anything yet. We're automation hour, and we're almost 20 minutes through it. So we got to get to the automation quickly, right? But we need to make sure that we are putting our resources where they can be most valuable for us. We're always constrained by systems or by people or by time or by money in terms of what we can do. And so we need to have a framework for making decisions, assigning sort of worth and having value associated with our work. And what Walter was talking about sort of alludes to this. This is the ROI methodology. It's produced by the ROI Institute. So another concept inside of process improvement. It can be applied in a bunch of different areas. But you can see this first part is what we've been talking about, this evaluation, planning, and data collection. Now we're at the place where we got to do the analysis. And the analysis really turns everything, these processes, those inefficiencies, the manual efforts, all that sort of stuff, it turns it into an impact. What is this costing us in terms of time? What is this costing us in terms of experience and potential loss of churn of people, both customers or employees? And what is this costing us in terms of real dollars? And expressing those impacts. And once you have an understanding of the impacts, you also do take the time to identify what would it cost in terms of time, effort, and people to do something about those impacts that you've identified. And given that information, then you have a framework for making decisions. And so using this chart, this is how Walter and I, when we're working on projects and we're given a budget, because very rarely does someone say, here's a blank check, go automate all the things, right? They want us to focus and say we want to get the most value that we can from the dollars that we're going to invest. So as we're looking at decisions, we have to determine, well, where do these fit on this scale of impact and cost and effort? And you can see this upper left quadrant is sort of like the magic spot, right? High impact, low cost and effort to implement. Why are we not doing this? These are the low-hanging fruit that are quick to implement, a week, 2 weeks. They can get added into the next sprint if you're running in an agile shop, and will have a big impact or big effect on the organization. The other one that we really want to consider is high impact and those high cost effort ones. And this is where we slip into transformative projects. And what I mean is adopting CPQ and billing. That is high impact. It's going to change the way that people work. It's also high cost and high effort. And so you have to plan for that and go about that a little bit differently than you would the left side. Our bottom left section, this is it doesn't move the needle a lot, but also doesn't take a lot of time and effort. It's sort of like reorganizing your sock drawer. It doesn't transform your life, but every time you get socks out in the morning, you feel a little bit better about it. Whereas the upper right corner is like remodeling your bathroom. That's going to take some dollars. That's going to take some time. When we get down to this bottom right section, this is where we should not be spending a lot of dollars or a lot of time. That is, they're sort of meh on impact and they have a high price tag. And when I say price tag, I mean people and dollars and time, representing a price. And so my favorite saying, and anyone that's heard me say this 1,000 times before, I apologize, here's 1,001, spending $1 on a nickel problem doesn't make a lot of sense. So here's 2 scenarios, and just to reinforce this point, just how would you categorize these? And if you want to just throw your answer in the chat, or I guess we don't have a chat. Throw your answer in as a question. Do a Jeopardy style. Put your answer in the form of a question.
But we totally have a chat.
Oh, I completely missed it. Okay, so the first one, our current state, we're doing we're doing quotes in Excel. And this is far more frequent than you would imagine. And obviously there's a lot of pains with that, right? It's slow to generate quotes. It's slow to get them out to customers. And copying from that Excel spreadsheet into Salesforce, someone's going to no profit their nonprofit, and then where our data is inaccurate. It's sort of a bad user experience, and our sales guys are going to be pining for the shop whether they worked at, where they had all this automated and may just go there. So to fix this, we're going to go products, price books, we're going to use standard quotes, we're going to throw in an e-signature tool, we're going to make this thing magical. It's 4 to 6 weeks, about 120 hours. Now, same group of people, they need to do change orders, but they only do like 1 or 2 change orders a month. It requires still a good bit of effort, right? Even though we may have paved the way with products and price books and gotten that part out, we still have to add a record type for that opportunity. We got to have a different quote template. We got to integrate the e-signature tool. We got a regression test because we already implemented the other one. And so there's 3 to 4 weeks, 60 hours. For me, the top one is borderline. It really depends on your organization. This one either sits, I want to go backwards. I don't know. This one either sits, if you're a big organization, this is low-hanging fruit. 4 to 6 weeks, 120 hours. Yeah, we knocked that out. Let's get that done. If you're a smaller organization, 4 to 6 weeks and 120 hours could represent a transformative, a big project, depending on your resources. If you are a solo admin, that's a big project. If you're at a shop where you're one of 20 admins, that's sort of a snack before lunch. The bottom one to me falls into low impact, and cost again can be subjective to your organization. But I think if it's only happening 1 or 2 times a month, from an impact perspective, we're beneath the line. 1 or 2 times a month, someone's having to do some manual effort in order to make something happen, and so that would not be a above the line item for us. And so that's our decision framework. Again, impact, you're either above and beneath the line. I think impacts are pretty objective to measure. Cost and effort is pretty subjective. It's going to be specific to your organization in terms of how many admins, what your budgets and resources like, what are the time, what are the costs to you to do these things.
Yeah, and to add to what Tom just said, if you think about it, don't get wrapped up so much in the frequency of the activity. I think more important is the amount of time that activity takes. So something that's done once or twice a month that takes 10 to 15 minutes, meh. Something that takes it's 1 or 2 times a month that takes 5 to 8 hours or more. Now you're looking at high impact.
Yeah, that's why impacts can be measured in a bunch of different ways, and it's important to categorize those. So this is a value equation, and in case you can't tell that I worked in healthcare, the whole value equation came from like the healthcare world, and originally the value equation was stated as quality over cost equals value. I like this guy's, Alex Mazzi, I think. This is his value equation. And that is, what is like the perfect world times the chance of achieving that perfect world divided by time and effort and sacrifice. And that equals value. And I think this is a pretty good value equation for us to consider. If we take the time to understand what is the perfect dream world, and what is our proposed plan, how close to that dream world is it going to get us, and then look at that against the resources that we have to commit, we can come up with a pretty good value statement in terms of what we want to automate. And I think, hopefully we see that we're building off of everything we've talked about. We talked about establishing our goals and a vision, doing the homework to gather the data that goes and supports those goals and visions. And now we're determining and doing the analysis to determine what is the value and what is the worth. And now we're finally going to do some things about it. And so we're going to transition here, and we're going to talk about our design principles. And Walter and I will be riffing back and forth in this section. But this is really sort of the things that we hold dear when we sit down and we begin doing design for a project that we're working on.
Hey, Tom.
Yep.
You have time for a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So Mark Jones, hey Mark.
Hey Mark.
Wanted to know on the strategy front, he's interested in hearing any thoughts you have on governing what automation you create, particularly when it comes to managing scalability and the need to amend automations over time.
Walter. Just so you know, Mark is a automation whiz on his own right too. So this not only is a great question, but one that's loaded with expertise behind it.
Oh, Walter's on mute.
Of course I am. I'm mute challenged. It's been 3 years of pure terror for me with the mute button. So a couple of things come to mind, especially when it comes to scalability and really the manageability of your automation, whether it is Apex triggers or Flow. And we're not going to talk about the rest of them at this point because, well, we all know going forward, it's Flow and Apex is where everything's going. So specific to both, leveraging or parameterizing any variable so you don't have to go in and actually change the flow if variables change, or you can add. So we're going to be talking about this later toward the end. And I know this is near to dear Tom's heart, but things like custom labels, custom metadata, being able to add really admin driven tasks to help maintain those flows by leveraging the parameterization. The other thing is stay away from monster flows if you can, leverage subflows, keep everything down into manageable bites. It'll allow you to be able to go in. I mean, I think of a flow at one of the customers we're dealing with currently, and Tom, I think you know which one I'm talking about. That is an absolute. It's still a monster flow.
But that thing's birth was not intended, right?
No,
it was a good
but that comes along to the maturity of a flow. Make
right.
sure you avoid that organic growth as needs arise. So be very, as you manage it, as you make changes, make sure you have governance in place, a change, even a change control board, code review or flow review. All of those things come into play when you're managing your environment. And flows and automation is no different than any other aspect of the platform. Parameterize as much as you can, modularize for reuse, and absolutely control changes, to make sure they're in line with strategy and are scalable as they go in.
Mark mentioned in his question in terms of governance, and I think although we don't have enough time to do this topic justice, I think at individual organizations of a certain size, you have to have a board or a committee. And part of the reason why we talked about identifying stakeholders and building your team is that once you reach that sort of size, changes shouldn't be up to, like, as even as architects and admins or developers, anyone who's technical and hands on a keyboard in Salesforce, we should not be on an island making decisions about what there is to do. We should be capturing requirements or asks from the business, helping prioritize them with that team, and they'll be sort of letting us know what is approved. And even then, those people should be doing the checks and tests afterwards before we release things. So I think the sort of short answer to that is you need to engage the people that we're trying to serve, and they need to be part of the governance of our automation and what we're doing in these environments, because absent their voice and their participation, we're getting into that automation for automation's sake world.
Absence of governance on any project, no matter the size of the company, will lead to failure. Eventually.
Awesome. Well, Mark, hopefully that answers your question. If not, please let us know. Stu is with us, Tom, Stu Adil. And he has a burning question for you. I want to make sure you've swallowed that before I ask this. Okay. How many times have you showed up at work with one red sock and the other black sock?
Counting today? How long has it been since we've gone into an office? I think 3-4 years. Okay. I would say roughly no less than 200 times. And it's because it's one of those things I don't really think it's worth spending a lot of mental energy on. I mean, no one else sees my feet besides the people that love me dearly. So thank you, Stu.
Perfect. All right, that wraps up questions for now. So let's jump on into your next topic.
So just I'll rewind just for a second and our design principles. It starts here. And if those have seen a previous presentation around sort of the our Nimble Manifesto and thought you'll recognize two of these. But when you're designing for automation, these are the three things that I think you have to keep in mind. It is, will this grow in size? How elastic is it, right? How much can it stretch like a rubber band? Am I going to put so much in it that it's going to break? And what can we do to increase that elasticity of our design? How easy is it to manage? If there's a part that does break, does the entire rubber band need to be reconstructed, or is it, can we take a piece of it offline and still retain, the integrity of the system? Can we make improvements to it? Do we have to alter the structure to change things? So then how easy is it to manage and maintain over time? And the last one, sort of the golden one, if it's a bad experience, then why are we doing it? And so it has to be something that our users and our target audiences love. And if it's not creating a better world for them, then we're sort of failing what we're doing wrong. So that leads into, so those are our ideals. These are our rules. The first rule being you document everything. And that means updating those process maps after you're adding new information. That means putting descriptions everywhere, help text everywhere, for your own sake and for anyone else that comes after you, just please, describe what your intent was. The next one is to be clean. We draw first. We should not be jumping into the flow landscape and building our flows without having spent some planning time. Let's use standard naming conventions. Let's have proper release train. The next two we're going to get into in a lot of detail, so I won't spend a lot of time on. One, you got to have absolute control over your order of execution. The last one is we hard code nothing, or we tried to hard code.
So I just want to touch on something because you said something that is near and dear to my heart, Tom. Under your build clean, draw/design first. There's an old mantra that us old coders used to follow, which is 80% design, 20% build. So if you design properly, the build becomes easy.
Mm-hmm. You just summed up the slide for me, so I don't have to worry about it. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Look, I mean, this wasn't meant to be a prop, but it's sitting here. This is my notebook, and you can see besides my doodles and stuff like that, like I sketch out my ideas, and before I build anything, this is where I do the design work before it ever becomes something that people see. So whether it's digitally or here, get a notepad, get a whiteboard, doodle away.
All right. I was about to flash the title of a book, but I don't have it handy to me right now, and I'm not getting up. But I have a book that reminds me of, and it's called The Art of Napkin Math, and it's all about being able to draw an idea and concept just like that. If you're at a restaurant talking, just ideas pop up, capture your ideas.
Good job.
So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a record triggered flow with two decision elements, a loop, and alignments.
Yep.
Another part of building clean is making sure that you standardize what you can. This is an example of our naming conventions that we use for our flow framework here at Crow. And because this is what we've adopted, everyone names their flows the same thing. This is just another example of being clean in how you approach your automation and everything that you do in Salesforce. We'll move from clean now into control.
So on top of what we've talked about already, there's also some areas of best practice. Now, these are not rules. These are areas of guidance that if you can stick to it, you do. There sometimes are reasons why you can't. So if we look at considered best practice, Flow, just like Clicks, is preferred no-code solution over Apex triggered automation. That doesn't say Apex triggered automation doesn't have its place, and it definitely does, and we'll get into that later, a little later. So Apex triggers are necessary for complex automation or batch execution. So once again, there, I got into it, it was later. Flow can leverage invocable Apex if you have some complexities that push the limits of configuration. Trigger, if you're writing triggers, Apex triggers, make sure you leverage the trigger handler helper framework. At the same time, if you're doing flows, leverage the trigger handler helper framework. It goes back to the question asked earlier: how do you make sure your stuff is maintainable? Break it into small, manageable chunks, and have it feed upon each other. When it comes down to Apex triggers, limit one trigger per object. Unless you're using a managed package, you can't. But if you're writing your own trigger, you can leverage the trigger handler framework, and you can have that trigger handle every aspect from before create, after create, before update, after update, before delete, after updelete, and after undelete, which those last two are reasons why you would have to use a trigger versus a flow. And you can have that handle all of those based on the having a handler and the framework behind it. You do not need one mega flow per object. And if you hear my dog, one of my puppies barking, because he wants to be an architect too. Number 4. So you don't need to create one mega object or mega flow per object. What you do want to have is a flow per type, or try to limit it to one flow per type. So you can have AfterSafe Flow.
Because I think we're going to get into that in a lot of detail here.
Okay. So yeah. I'll keep out of the detail here. Leverage the trigger order field on flows. That is fairly new, and it allows you to then orchestrate which flow runs first based on the flow type.
So I think that when we say maintain control, and the reason why these 7 keys to success, this really summarizes everything you're going to see next. We'll get into the weeds. It's because of this. You have to have an absolute mastery of the control or absolute mastery of your order of execution in order to design automation well. You should know when you click save on a record, what's happening in the background. And here are all the steps. This is the latest. It's sort of simplified and dumbed down for my own understanding. So I just tried to keep the couple words. But you'll see that record triggered flows that are before save are 3, before save Apex is 4, after save Apex is 8, and after save flows are 14. So understanding that allows you to design, and it also helps you when you're making decisions on what tools to use. And Walter, I know this is one from the well-architected site.
Yeah, and this, yeah, definitely this comes in. So if you take a look at when are you going to use, when should you use before save versus an after save? So a before save is when you're writing a flow that's going to update a field on the same record based on an action that occurred, a stage change, an amount change, changing a flag, whatever. Anything that you're changing on the same record, you don't need the after save. The reason you need an after save is because the after save will generate IDs if it doesn't already exist. So you would use an after save when you're doing cross object CRUD. If you're doing asynchronous processing, is the other reason. The biggest reason originally was if I was creating, let's say I was creating a account and I wanted to automate the creation of the first contact. It was an old way we used to do it before they had person accounts. We'd write in some automation to create the contact, but that couldn't happen until after the account was saved. AfterSafe Flow plus trigger and Apex, you get into more complex processing. The save has to happen in order to fire the Apex trigger, or in order for the Apex class to gain access to certain attributes. So you look at asynchronous process or complex list processing.
I think the
And
big
then,
thing chart really shows, I think the big thing this chart shows, besides the available, not available, is that it really pushes what's not ideal. And I think that's a question that a lot of people have is, well, how do I know in a world where flow can basically do anything, right? If you look at column 2, AfterSafe flow triggers, you basically do anything. And that's the one that most people use when they think of flow. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think this chart does a really, really good job of highlighting that, and like having a decision matrix of when you may look to combine flow and Apex, or when you may go to Apex first.
And as usual, Tom Silvertongue Hoffman has been so much more eloquent than I in describing this. That was awesome, Tom. Just wanted to call that out. Awesome. I think we can go on to the next.
So we talked about these, but we wanted to make a separate slide here because the theme of this is not necessarily the one trigger per object or one trigger per each type per object. The theme is the smallest number of triggers is the best number of triggers. And I know there's a school out there in the ecosystem, and we've had some lively debates about this in different forums. But I think when you get into that world where you're creating a record triggered flow with entry criteria and just creating tons and tons and tons of record triggered flows, it's not a pattern that we would recommend. It not necessarily for performance reasons, but getting back to manageability, scalability, usability from an admin perspective, I think the consolidation becomes really beneficial. So we won't harp on it too much, but our viewpoint is smaller number of triggers, yay! Lots of triggers, okay.
And that doesn't mean that you don't automate as much stuff, because you can. It does mean that you use the smaller number to accomplish the same amount of work to do.
Yeah.
What many triggers did. And it doesn't mean also that those triggers should be built to be monstrous triggers, but they should be modularized and flow in a acceptable manner. So if we look at the trigger handler class,
safe harbor statements. So we're going to throw out the automation hour safe harbor. So we're going to throw out the automation hour safe harbor statement that the views expressed by the guest presenters are the views of the guest presenter, and automation hour remains Switzerland.
Okay. As long if we can caveat that, but the views of the presenters are right.
Maybe we can talk about that. It's all right. It's what makes us individuals. There's a mentor I had once that he said, I'm showing you a way. It's not the way, it's a way. And as long as that way is scalable and manageable and meets the need, then your way works.
I think that's the most important thing, is that if not having a plan is the biggest mistake you can make. Not having an approach. If you go with the other approaches, that's fine, but be intentional about it. Understand why you're doing it, and you're always serving 3 masters: scalability, manageability, and experience. As long as you keep those things in mind, you will be okay. Hey, Walter, I've noticed we're getting up against 3:50 here. I know we don't have, but we have Q&A. So
we'll go through this real quick.
Let's lightning round this.
Yeah, I'm going to lightning round this. So trigger handler class is awesome. It works for both code and for flow. It's, you set your trigger, you put your control in place, and then you have another aspect of the code do.
And it's a familiar pattern, like it's what Process Builder runs on. And so that's how we structure our AfterSafe flows. We use the same thing. We have a trigger, decision elements are our handlers, and then we're calling subflows or actions, just like you would in Apex. For other
and
ones,
it makes it, you know, the trigger, the helper class and the handler.
for other triggered flows, so before save, same pattern, right? One trigger to start, decisions as our helpers or handlers, but instead of having all of the actions and subflows, because we're only touching the record we're on, we do our actions right there. Plus, you can't do subflows and before saves. For schedule flows and asyncs, we do put entry criteria, and we keep it very narrow. We only put the actions that are tied to that criteria, and we'll have multiple asynchronous or multiple schedule flows because we want those to be very, just like a batch job in Apex. We want that batch job to pick up the records, only the records that it needs, take only the actions that it needs, and then whoop, stop. So the benefits of our approach, or as I will rephrase in light of Michelle's safe harbor statement, this is the reason why we're right, is for us, it's easier, it fits the manageability test, it offers to us better benefits in the area of scalability, and from a usability perspective, I think it checks a lot of boxes as well. We'll have the deck afterwards, so we won't spend a lot of time reading them to you. The last two things, or the last point we really want to harp on, is that we don't hard code anything. Anything that become a variable, that could become a variable, should become a variable, because in this specific instance, you see where it says opportunity in 3 different places, amount greater than 0. If all of a sudden we changed that rule from amount greater to 0 to amount greater than 1, we would need to edit this flow. We would need to go edit this formula or validation rule. Right? We have to go in and touch multiple different places. And you can have errors or other risks associated with that. If we had made this a variable using a custom label or custom metadata, all we would have had to do instead is reference it. And that's what this last slide here is showing, that we're referencing that value that we put into custom metadata as opposed to hard coding the value. So most people know we don't hard code IDs, and that's one that everyone's heard. We want to take it a step further and say, let's not hard code anything that could be made into a variable or that's subject to the change of the business or a whim. You know, we're not going to change the birthday of the president, right? That's a fixed thing in time. Yeah, sure, if you hard code it, the world's not over. But another example before we go to questions is just user characteristics. This one seems innocent, but again, things change over time. People will be hard code profile names or user roles or things like that into validation rules. And just want to say, use custom permissions. It's a better way. Again, it's scalable, it's manageable, it adds better user experience. You don't have to have these one-off cases and things like that. So with that, thank you. We got 5 minutes for witty banter and talking about dogs.
Oh, well, you've got some questions coming in first. So, but that was fantastic. Thank you. Absolutely love it. So first question from Mark that we have again. He says, honestly, there's questions I could ask on all 4 points that you raised. But as always, what Mark would like your take on is your approach to documentation with flow tooling being rather lacking, to say the least. So given that we don't have a lot of good tools to document our flows and automations, how do you do it? What do you use?
So for me, I'm not paid to make this statement, but I'm an Elements fanboy. And so we, in all of the orgs that we work in as a consulting partner, we put Elements in place with using our consulting license. And we would do a lot of our process mapping there. So at least they exist when we take them away. And that's where I use to draw and sketch out flows during the design process. So for me, that's where I do it. It's inside the org. I'm able to access it. But yeah, I think until we get a flow playground, which is really what we need, Diana Jaffe, if you're listening, we love you and we want a flow playground. Yeah, it is a challenge, but I think pick a tool that's available and accessible to you and just get consistent about using it.
Awesome. So I actually heard another CTA, I'm trying to remember who it was, that said PowerPoint is actually a preferred flow sketching tool because if your flow will not fit on a single PowerPoint slide, it's too complicated.
You know, and that is a theory I have as well. I could create a flow all day long and lucid chart, draw it out there. But if I then drag it over to PowerPoint and it's too big, I'm going to break it down.
I always thought those were very interesting because that was one thing that I never thought of. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that's actually a pretty solid canvas to constrain yourself with.
Yeah.
So the argument also being that you have to be able to read it on a PowerPoint screen.
I was
going to say, it has to be legible on the PowerPoint screen. If not, then what you have to do is get your flow to reference where you need to explode on a subflow. So
right.
But and honestly, I use that same for process mapping.
Awesome. Yes, I have to give credit. So thank you, Mark, for giving me the name. Johan Furman was the CTA that brought that up at a AMA at Automation Dreamin'.
Nice.
So, all right. So Stu would like to know, does the framework that you have created also make your flows loosely coupled in terms of kind of your flow trigger handling and that sort of pattern?
Yeah, if you're doing it right, absolutely. Everything should be loosely coupled.
You should be able to take things offline easily. It's a matter of deleting a line between a decision element or redrawing a line from a decision element to take things off, or be able to copy and paste to reuse and make it modular and reuse the same subflow with different inputs going into it from depending on what the answer to the prior question was. I think that's exactly the point, to make it as Lego bricks as possible as opposed to one big solid wall.
So, and for those who are on the call who may be trying to learn flow or watching these later that are newer to flow, would you be able to give us a quick definition of loosely coupled and why that is a good thing?
CTA, man, that's all you.
Oh, sure. Let me go back to coupling 101. So if you look at whether it's data or programmatic theory, loosely coupled means each element can stand on its own, and then they can reference or call one another, versus having a hard coupling where you enter at one entry point, you have to follow the flow, and then you can't move to the next until you hit that final step. So you need to have a build in place that allows you to leverage each element of the flow, whether it's a subflow. So if you look at a flow itself on its own, that's tightly coupled. Create subflows, those can be loosely coupled. Subflow could be called by maybe a different flow, or it could be called even headless. If you do it
on asynchronous flow with a field update.
Exactly.
What it does, it distributes your points of failure. If you in that single wall analogy, if one part of that wall fails, the whole wall has failed. In a Lego brick, if one of these bricks comes down, you can isolate it, and now you still have a mostly functional wall there. So
perfect. All right.
That
so
was
Jeff,
a really good question. It made me think.
I love it. Jeff Rawl wants to know if you have any tips for unit testing with flows. He said, flows always scare me because I can test in Apex fairly well.
Well, unit testing for flows coming. I mean, I know it's in beta right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't debug in beta?
Is it GA? Is it GA next month for partial? So I think, yes, that's coming. Unit testing for flow is beta and will be GA. So it doesn't cover all flows yet, but it is something that the flow team is aware of, and they are trying to cover that gap. So that's
the other thing is, if you think about a failure in flow, it ends up generating an alert to the sysadmins. 99.9% of the time when we get those, that points you to where the errors are occurring. And you end up having to lean, you may have to lean on a developer, you may have to lean on somebody more technical, but you definitely can leverage those alerts to drill down to where the failure occurs. It tells you what flows is failing, and then from there you can, it gives you the detail that you can usually even find out which node is failing.
Yep, I have used those for troubleshooting quite a bit. And I think I've also learned from using those for troubleshooting quite a bit exactly how important flow error handling actually is.
Yes. Yeah, it's something we didn't call out, but 100% part of your design needs to be error handling.
And we're going to have a session on that later this year for sure as well.
Perfect.
So fantastic. Well, let me do one last refresh everywhere to see if we have any more questions popping in. I think this has been fantastic. So I'm going to make a suggestion for a cage match at TDX to debate our flow patterns. Tom, no, you know I love you, absolutely. And I don't disagree with you, but I know there's reasons for all the different flow design patterns. So I want to make sure that, no one out there feels attacked for choosing a different design pattern for their needs, you know?
Absolutely. I will never debate against others as long as it's meeting the tenets of the base tenets of scalability, manageability and experience.
I jest about it a lot because it's fun amongst us professionals who like we get into these conversations, and it's sort of like a steel sharpens steel, right? You're getting great minds together where there is no one right answer, but to sort of share opinions and help all of us grow. So it's in jest, and please don't take me seriously mostly ever.
Oh, I mean, I'll.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to throw down, and I will win. But even then, it would just be fun.
Absolutely. No, and I'd never, I might break a nail, and we can't have that. So. But anyway, all right. I think we have gotten through all of the questions. All right. Somebody does want to know. Mark wants to know who's going to referee the cage match, though. So we'll have to talk about that.
Probably gently.
But again, thank you so very much for your time. This has been great. I know I learned a few things. So hopefully our attendees have as well. And we just appreciate you both spending your time with us on the Automation Hour today. So thank you much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Yes, to give back.
Bye.